Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Bet. We are at the beginning of the sixth parak. Let's just remind ourselves of some of the things that we've learned over the last few weeks in the fourth and fifth parakim. Because today, again, we're starting the sixth chapter. Over the last several weeks, during our study of the fourth and fifth chapters, we addressed sales of certain items without specifying precisely what was included. So we looked at what happens if you sell a house and you don't tell what's included in the house. What happens if you sell a courtyard and you don't say specifically what's included? What about an olive press, bathhouses, towns, fields? That was all in the fourth chapter. And then in the fifth chapter, we looked at ships and wagons and donkeys and cows and dumps and pits and beehives and dovecotes and trees and meat. All of that was covered in the fifth chapter. And then in the fifth chapter, we considered the sale of production and certain rules of transactions. And we considered when a transaction should be voided and how one completes an acquisition. And we concluded with laws associated with sending a minor to a store and with maintaining proper weights and measures. So the sixth chapter continues the theme of discussing unspecified transactions by considering the sale of produce and whether the unspecified produce must be fit for planting or eating. And so let's begin at the top of Tzadik Bet Amud Aleph, very top of the page. Hamocher peiros l'chaveiro. If one sells fruit to his friend, uzra'an, and then the friend, the buyer plants them. V'lo tzamcho, and they do not grow. It does not blossom. V'afilu zera pishtan, even if the item that was purchased was flaxseed. Now, usually flaxseed, and we'll see in Rashbam in a moment, usually flaxseed is purchased for planting. It's just that some people eat it. Eino chayav ba'achriyusan. The seller is not responsible for the loss. Let's take a look at the Rashbam v'lo tzmacho. Lomi boy peiros. We don't even have to get to the idea of fruit. De'ika dezabin lezriya. Because when it comes to fruit and the seeds of fruit, like some people will buy it in order to eat, and some people will buy it in order to plant. And so as a result, the seller really has a legitimate claim to say, I sold it to you in order for you to plant. In order for you to eat, and not to plant. And so as a result, when you now planted it and it didn't grow, you're out. That's your tough luck. And there's no bad sale. There's no mistaken sale in this situation. Klal at all. Ella, rather, not only is it with respect to fruit, but afilu zera pishtan, even when it comes to flaxseed. Because most of the flaxseed that's purchased is in order to plant the koninoto, the kevan deika dezabin nami lachil. But however, since some people buy it to eat, keda amrinan, as we saw in Maseches Nedarim, luliva de kitna, when it comes to the innards of the flax, lekutcha, it's good for a kutach dish. A kutach dish was a sort of this yogurty kind of dairy dish that would be made from effectively spoiled milk that would give it a pungent taste, and this would you would eat it with kutach. And so we see from that the Gemara in Nedarim that people eat flaxseed. And therefore,
I cook with flaxseed.
What? I mean, lots of people eat flaxseed. 100%. It's very good for your health.
Yeah, flaxseed.
Yeah, good. So the seller is not liable for the loss that happens to it. That he can say, I sold it to you in order to eat. Because when it comes to money, lo aslin and basar ruba, as we will see in the Gemara, but we don't follow the rove when it comes to monetary issues. So here in this case, the seller could have said, or we might have said about the seller and the buyer, listen, most people buy flaxseed to plant. And so as a result, you should have expected the flaxseed, the purchaser to want to plant it. So rather, we say like Shmuel that we don't follow the road, Gemara. V'davka zera pishtan, and it's only when it comes to flaxseed, because mishum dechazi lachila, because it is fit for eating. Aval zaroni gina, when it comes to the seeds for certain garden vegetables, kagon zera karob, like for carob, the kafnot, and for leek, she'eno nerchal klal, where the seeds are not eaten at all. Well, then you would be obligated, as we will see. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Zaroni Haki Mefarish beGemara, and that's what we're going to see in the Gemara. So let's take a look at Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's statement back in the Mishnah, and it's in the third line. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Zarone Gina, when it comes to the seeds for a garden, She'ena Nechalin, which nobody would possibly eat, Chayev ba'achriyusan, you're liable for any kind of damage that for the fact that they didn't actually produce they didn't flower, they didn't blossom. Now let's take a look at the Rashbam. Dahavi mekak tos. This is Rashbam 1, 2, 3, 6 lines up, narrow lines from the bottom of the narrow lines in the Rashbam. This ends up being because seeds of the garden are bought for planting, not at all for eating. There's no question that that's a mistaken sale. Because it is just like if you were to sell olive wood, and then it turns out that the wood is not from an olive tree, but rather from a sycamore tree. Or yayin v'nimtza chometz, or you sell wine and it turns out to be vinegar. If you bought wine, Mark, would you want vinegar?
No.
No, of course not. The Havi Mekach Tos, that's a mistaken sale. The Kol Shekain Bekan, and you know what? This is even more of a mistaken sale. The Hasam, because in the case of olive wood and sycamore wood, or vinegar and wine, are there people who want vinegar? Yes, some people like vinegar, right? For oil, yeah, for a salad dressing, exactly. And some people like wine, right?
Yeah,
and some people,
right.
and then some people like olive wood, and some people like sycamore wood. So there are people who like them both. Mia ika denikale. There are people who like it bahachi. The bahachi bahachi. The ika denikale bahachi. There are some people who like this one, and some people who like that one. Aval hacha. But here, when it comes to the garden seeds, kevan de achila lo chazu, because it's not appropriate for eating it at all. Ulazriya lo chazu, and for planting it's not appropriate. Ein lo takana. There's nothing it's good for. Ella lahasaka, except for burning. Vafilu demei eitzim lo yishalim lo. And frankly, the buyer doesn't even owe the seller the money of what it would be worth in sort of like firewood lokeach. Daha lo nene behem klum, because when he planted it. He tried to plant it, so he got no benefit from the seeds whatsoever. The gam lo shalach behem yad, and don't tell me, well, that's your own fault for destroying the seeds, and you should have just kept them out and used them for firewood. Then this chayav ba'achriyuso, so that the buyer should be liable for their destruction. Ukamisha amar lo mocher lecha zarayatam. Dummy, because this case is like somebody who says, I want you to sell it to me for planting. Devade lazaras vininhu, because there's not a question that the person who bought it with an intention to plant. So that's the Rashbam. Rashbam has explained. Now we understand there is a mekach taos, a bad sale, a mistaken sale in connection with buying garden seeds that are not edible and are not actually fit for planting because they don't actually flourish. Now,
so why is there no responsibility on the part of the buyer? Person buys seeds, he has to fertilize it, he has to water it. If he didn't do that properly,
Oh,
so why-
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You are mechaven to Tosas's question, which is exactly where we're going next. So that's brilliant. So let's take a look at the top Tosos. Zaroni Gina She'enim Nechalim Chai Bakriusan. Right. So the Ken's question is why? What? Maybe the buyer did something wrong, and maybe that's why it didn't produce anything. Tema amai chayib. Why should the seller be liable for be responsible? Lemale, let him say to the buyer, Masha lo samcho lefisha lo zarat otam bisman shahayu ru'uyim lizriya. Maybe you didn't plant it at the right time. Dahachi amrina b'hamakabel. Because in Parak Makabel in Bava Metzia, what did we see? The Tanan Hamakabel saw the Mechavero that if I were to be a sharecropper for Stan, v'achla chagav onishtafa, and then either the crickets came and they ate it, the locusts came and they ate up the field, after I had planted it and it had grown. Nishtafa, or the sandstorms or the wind came and ruined the field. If it was a nationwide or an area-wide problem, minakanin low minha hadamim. I don't have to pay Stan the full amount because I lost out on the ability to plant this year, and it was nobody's fault, and it wasn't a national tragedy. But Amar Allah, Reish Lakish said in the Gemara, Lo shanu ela shizara v'tzamcha v'achla chagav aval zara v'lo tzamcha. But if in fact he planted and it didn't actually produce any goods, well, and because there's still more time left to plant, Matzi Amrle, the Stan could say back to me, Balakarka, the Stan, the owner of the land, Kol Yemei Zera Zarale. You have Va'azil. There's more time for me to plant, and therefore I should plant. But what's the implication? The implication is that if I wouldn't have any time to plant, meaning it's my responsibility to plant in the right time. So why can't the seller will have Stan be the seller, just as he was the owner of the real property? He'll be the seller and I'll be the buyer. And it didn't flourish. It didn't produce any results. And so as a result, I go to him and say, I want my money back. And he says, well, why? How do I know that you planted it the right time? That it's only in the situation where the entire nation, the entire area had a problem. So therefore, dekula abagi nami lo tzamchu. So as a result, and the whole area didn't have produce. V'leislan lamemer shekol b'nei bagi zaro zera she'eno roi luzria. And it doesn't make sense in that situation to say that everybody bought seeds that weren't appropriate for planting, and therefore we're going to say that if there's any time left, they need to engage in good planting, and we're not going to blame the seeds. But here, in this case, maybe we do blame the seeds. Inami, and this I think is the
water.
What?
And then got to put water.
Yeah, maybe they forgot to put the water. Inami, and here's really, I think, the stronger answer to Ken's question. Hach ein hacha myri de igloi milsa lemafreya shelo haya ru'uyin. It has become clear retroactively that we understand that these were not ru'uyin lizriya, that they were not fit for planting, klal, at all. Meaning that somebody did an analysis of the seeds and said, these are not actually fit for, these are defective. Exactly. V'chein mashma b'Gemara, and that we'll see in the Gemara. De'ika lamanda mechayev l'shalom afilu ha'otza, because we are going to see in the Gemara, although I don't think today, we are going to see that there are people who hold that not only am I able to get my money back from Stan, but any of the expenses that I had, there's an opinion that I get also my expenses back from Stan for all the work that I hired, all the workers that I hired to take care of the property because Stan sold me defective materials. The ein svar l'chayvo klal kol ha'otza ela kishelo hayaruyin klal izrira. And the only time it could possibly make sense that Stan should be liable for the consequential damages is only if it's clear that it was never possible. If there's any thought that maybe I was somehow responsible, Stan would never be liable for the expenses and the like. The yada hamocher, and indeed, maybe we even need to have that the seller knew shelo haisa ru'uya l'zriya, that it was not fit for planting. So as a result, that's the addressing of Ken's question, that actually we're talking about a situation where we absolutely know that I didn't do anything wrong. We absolutely know that the issue is, or maybe I did something wrong, but we also know 100% certain that those seeds wouldn't have done anything no matter what I did. That's the situation, and that's the assumption of the facts. But in fact, if in fact we don't know anything about the seeds, and in fact we don't know, I don't have the evidence that proves that I did everything absolutely correctly, well then Stan would be exempt from any liability. So that is Toso. So excellent question. Definitely a gold star for that one. So Itmar, now the Gemara
And
goes.
what's the rationale of Tosfos' first answer again? If the whole
The
world
rationale
was that with no seeds flourish from anybody in the whole region?
Yes, so the rationale of Tosfos' first answer is that how do I know that somebody has the potential for making the responsive claim of that maybe you didn't do the right thing, is based on this Gemara in Bava Metzia. So his first answer is that maybe the Gemara does not imply that you always have the right to claim that you didn't do the right thing. But at the end of the day, I preferred Tosfos' second answer,
right,
because one would say maybe even without the Gemara in Bava Metzia, meaning even if you can explain away that Gemara, maybe in fact that situation that all sellers should be able to claim you didn't do the right thing. And that there are other Gemaras where we always say that it's hamotzi mechavero alav araya. And here you are the planter and you want to say that you're taking it away from the, you're trying to get your money back from the seller. Well, then you need to prove you did everything right. So that's why I think the second answer is the better answer.
I like that answer, but the first answer dealt with the whole region was destroyed.
Yes, the first answer, I'm sorry that I can't hear you so well because of the banging in the background. The first answer was that that the situation in Bava Metzia was where the whole area didn't produce. And so as a result, we're not going to say in that situation that everybody had bad seeds, because that's kind of ridiculous. So as a result, we're going to assume that there's the possibility that everybody did something wrong based on the current circumstance. And so as a result, that's why we'll give extra credit to the seller in that situation, or in that situation, it's the homeowner, the owner of the property who's talking to the sharecropper, and we'll give extra credit to that homeowner, the landowner, to say, maybe you didn't do the right thing and you need to plant now because there's still more time for planting. So but in an ordinary situation, maybe we do assume that seeds are sufficiently likely not to be valid, that's the best explanation, and that's therefore we would follow that. And that's interesting because you might think that there's an idea of that shows that we follow the rove, that the rove situation is that the seeds are bad and not that the planter made a mistake. But again, we will see in the Gemara that we do not follow the Rove. There are a number of Gemaras that seem to contradict that, and there are some explanations of those Gemaras that suggest that maybe there are two kinds of Rove. But in any event,
But it
we'll
would seem
pause here
that if the
and just
whole
note that
area
we're
was,
gonna now go on to the Gemara.
it just would seem if the whole area was affected, then the buyer would not be responsible. And the seller could not claim that you had, that I had anything to do with this.
No. If anything, remember, in a situation where a whole area is affected, although the homeowner might lose, the seller of the seeds will definitely win, right? If I sell you seeds and then there ends up being a drought in the place, you can't come back to me and say, I sold you defective seeds. Nobody had any produce. My seeds were great seeds. It just is on you that the seeds didn't produce because there was a drought, right? That's the whole point, is that that's why Tosas's first answer differentiates the situation where no one did anything, where it's nobody's fault. It's nature's fault. It's clear in that situation that it's probably not my seeds that were the problem. You can't come back to me and try and get your money back for the seeds.
Also,
right. So, in that case, nobody's at fault.
What if it's nobody's fault? Then the owner of the item loses, right? If it's nobody's fault that lightning comes down and strikes your car and blows it up, you're not going to be able to go back to the manufacturer of the car and say, "Oh, I want my money back on the car." Of course
Correct.
not.
Correct.
Right. And so the same thing with the seeds. Exactly.
Correct.
You bought the seeds were yours. And now, lightning came and destroyed your entire field.
Correct.
You can't come back and complain about the
or
seeds.
you planted in fallow ground.
Right. Or maybe, as Stan is pointing out, in that situation where it's possible that you might have done the wrong planting and planted in the wrong field, you planted, in a place where, you can't grow grapes, too far north. It's better in wheat to grow in those kinds of places. So, that kind of thing. All right. In any
But
event,
that's
now the
what for
Gemara.
eggplant.
What?
That I think be better for eggplant.
Yeah, could be better for eggplant. A good point, Mark. All right. So now the Gemara is going to ask something that may seem to be off topic. So let's take a look at the first Rashbam. Lekaman on the Gemara, 1, 2, 3, fourth line down in the wide lines, not the widest lines, but the middle wide lines of Rashbam. Idmar, Lekaman parach Allah mimasnisen. That we're going to see that we're going to ask a question from our Mishnah, and that's why we're going to talk about this topic right now. But what is the topic? Itmar, back into the Gemara again, fifth line of the on Daf Tzadik Bet Amud Aleph. Hamoker shor lechavero. If you sell an ox to your friend, v'nimtza nagkan, and it turns out that it's a goring ox, Rav Amar, and now, of course, you therefore cannot use it for plowing, because as soon as you put a plow on it, it's trying to gore everything under the sun. Rav says, it's a false sale. It's a mistaken sale. Ushmuel Amar Yachol Omar Lo. The seller can say to the buyer, I sold it to you to slaughter it, not in order to use it for plowing. Oh, now the Gemara asks, "V'lechzei igabra dezaven l'raja." But 1 second, why not look and see what the purpose of this person is in the buying? Meaning, if the buyer is a farmer, then he's probably buying it in order to plow. And if the buyer is a slaughterhouse, he's probably buying it to slaughter. So shouldn't that determine the nature of the sale? And shouldn't the seller be liable based on that basis? So, yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right. That if, in fact, it was clear why the person was buying it, well, then everyone would agree, Rav and Shmuel would agree that the seller has liability if the item sold is not fit for the clear purpose intended by the buyer. But here we're talking about where somebody buys animals, sometimes for eating and sometimes for plowing. Well, 1 second, why not check to see what the value of the money is that proves the point? Meaning, why not check to see whether or not the amount paid is equal? Because of course, an ox for plowing is worth more in general than an ox for eating. And so maybe you should check to see the prices. And if you pay the price that shows that he wants to eat it, so then fine, then he has no complaint if he now tries to use it as an ox for plowing. But if in fact he paid an amount that should be for plowing, well then it's a false sale. It's a mistaken sale. Now Tosos here asks an important question, and he notes that earlier in this Gemara we saw on Daf Ayin Zayin Amabet that in fact there's no way you can make a proof from the price paid. That in that situation we were dealing with somebody who sold a yoke, and the question was does the yoke include the animal or not include the animal? And now, naturally, if we used in the English language, when you say yoke, of course it wouldn't include the animal. However, the Gemara explains that we're talking about a place that sometimes when you refer to a yoke, you mean a yoked animal, and that what you're really buying is a yoked animal when you say a yoke. And so as a result, there was a degree of uncertainty in that situation. And we asked, why don't we check to see how much the person agreed to pay? And we said, you know what? Looking at the value, that won't do it for us. And so the question that Tosos asks is, okay, if you're telling me that the value won't do it for us in that situation, why will it do it for us in this situation? Right? Maybe this should be the same. So Tosos highlights that situation back on Daf Ayin Zayin Amabet had two things going for the seller, that therefore we were not going to use the value of the transaction in order to do any factual analysis. Point number one is that it was point number one, there was the seller was holding the money. And so as a result, if you want to get something from him, you need definitive facts. And second, we were dealing with a situation where most of the people in a particular location don't use the term yoke to mean a yoked animal, but rather when they say yoke, they mean just a yoke. And so as a result, therefore, we had two arguments in favor of the seller, and therefore we're not going to use the value of the price in order to make a determination. Here, however, things are different, because in this situation, the person uses the item equally or is just as likely to be buying it for food as for plowing. And so as a result, there is no chazaka in terms of what his most likely outcome is. There's just the fact that the seller happens to be holding it. But on the other hand, the buyer is saying that I definitely wanted it for the other purpose. I wanted it for plowing. And so as a result, now in this situation, it's a more even debate. And therefore, Tosos says that in that situation, we can use the value of the price. In any event, and Rashbam offers a different explanation. Rashbam addresses the same question, noting that in that situation, there was not a majority that called an ox a yoke. But here, the buyer buys both, so there is greater uncertainty. So a very similar answer, but not quite the same as what Tosfos answers. And so as a result, we can use price as evidence. So
What difference
is
does it make who's holding the money according to Tosfos?
I can't hear you. What?
Well, what difference does it make according to Tosfos who is holding the money?
Well, because the muhzak, we say in Jewish law
Right.
that possession is we say in general that possession is 9/10 of the law. In Jewish law, we say hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. And
Right.
so as a result of who's holding the money absolutely matters. Okay,
So
so the Gemara answers that why can't value be the proof? Because srika de ayakar bisra bekam b'nei raja. That it turns out that the price of meat was high. And so as a result, the value of the two animals, whether you're going to buy it for plowing or you're going to buy it for slaughter, in both situations, it's the exact same. Well, 1 second. Well, 1 second. If I bought the animal from Stan and I wanted to use it for plowing and it's worth the same as for slaughter, well, then who cares that I now didn't get the animal that I wanted? I got the same value, so I'll go and I'll sell it to Mark, and Mark will slaughter it and he'll have a delicious steak dinner. So why does it make any difference? Nafkamina latirka. No, of course it makes a difference. I wanted it. I wanted to do one transaction. I didn't want to have to do 3 transactions. Now that Stan is selling me this animal that's really only good for eating, I bought the animal, so now I have to find a buyer for it. I have to sell it to somebody else. And then I have to find another supplier who's going to supply me with the right animal. So that's a lot of work. I would much rather just go back to Stan and say, either give me the right animal or you'll at least let me take my money from you so that I don't have to find another purchaser and spend the efforts on that. Okay, so Heichi Dummy, the Gemara asked, all right, I hear all of that, but what are we talking about? Because listen to the following scenario. What happens if Stan doesn't have the money to pay me back? He used the money on something else. He had his own steak dinner. So Heichidami, as we turn to Tzadik Bet Bet, if Stan doesn't have the money to pay me back, well, then the ox that I bought from him is actually worth the amount that I paid, so I should just hold on to it. The Amri Inshi, as people say, min mare rishvaseich pare afra. If you have an opportunity to get paid back by one of your debtors, get the money, get whatever you can. Meaning, if somebody's willing to pay you back in pennies, get paid back in pennies. If somebody's willing to pay you back in in-kind merchandise, take the in-kind merchandise. Don't worry about whether or not it's it's the easiest thing to sell. If it's worth $1,000 and you're owed $1,000, take it. You'll find eventually somebody to buy it. But if in fact you deny taking it or you refuse to take it, what's going to end up happening? 3 months later, the person won't even have that to pay you back. And so as a result, you'll lose out on getting paid back at all. So the principle is that if Stan couldn't pay me for return my money to me, I'm going to keep the animal. So what difference does it make if we say that this is a mekach toast? So lo tricha de ikalash delumimine. So as a result, we must be talking about a situation where Stan does have the ability to pay me back. And Rav Amar, and so what's the debate about between Rav and Shmuel? Harezeh mekach toast, basaruba aslinan. Rav says that this was a mistaken transaction, and therefore, because we follow the rove. And Veruba Larajazavne. And even though I may buy for both purposes, most people buy for plowing. Shmuel Amarlach, and Shmuel says no. Tias Lina Basaruba Beisu. When it comes to following the rove, that is true when we deal with prohibitions. And Rashbam gives an example. Could go Tesha Chenvios Mochros Basar. If we go to 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 10, or about 10 lines up. In the Rashbam on the narrow lines on Tzadik Bet. Kagon Teja Kanvios, like 9 different stores, Mochos Basar Shkuta, that sell kosher meat. The Akas Mocheres Basar Nevela, and one says not kosher meat. The Amrina Benimsa Halach, that when we say in the situation over there that the person who finds it, Halach Achar Harov, he can follow the majority, and therefore he can eat that piece of meat. I don't recommend eating the piece of meat that you find on the floor, that you find somewhere, but he can eat that piece of meat because most of the slaughterhouses, most of the butchers in the town are kosher butchers. Okay, so, but Mamona, but when it comes to money, back into the Gemara. But when it comes to money, we do not follow that principle. We do not follow the rove. And so now that brings us to the 2 dots. And now we're going to have a series of 5 Mishnayos that are going, and Brisas, each of which is going to challenge either Rav or Shmuel, or possibly both. So
if we said earlier, eat the lake of the Ishtalume Mine, that's Shmuel, right? So, but in any case, but
sorry, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You got to speak up because of the big.
I'm saying that earlier we said eat the lake of the Ishtalume Mine, right? That's Shmuel, right? But even if it isn't, so what are we saying there? That if he doesn't have the money, the person, the victim, I guess, of the buyer can say, give me, if you don't have money, give me the food in your storehouse. Give me something of equal. Is that what we're saying there? Give me whatever.
No. The Gemara, it's not, that is not a statement by Rav or Shmuel. This is a clarifying statement. The question.
Okay, so whoever it is, but the point of it,
the question is, what are the circumstances that Rav and Shmuel have this debate? And the answer is that it cannot be talking about where the seller has no money. Because if the seller had no money, I would just keep the animal that I bought from him, and that would be the payment, because the animal is equal in value to the amount that I owe. And I would rather just get something than nothing. And therefore, we're going to say that the debate between Rav and Shmuel about whether or not we say this is a mekach tos must be a situation where Stan, the seller, has money in order to pay me back.
But why not say, instead of keeping the animal, he doesn't want that animal. So
exactly, I don't want that animal.
He could say to the seller of that animal, you don't have money to pay me back because you spent it on buying a car. Give me your car. That's the value of this. Give me something else equal to this animal. I don't want the animal, but you owe me money because you gave me a bad animal.
So, all right. So the way that we should really understand Deleka Ishtalume means that the guy has nothing with which to pay back. Meaning that he doesn't have the car. Like I said, he bought a steak dinner that he already ate. He does not have the ability to pay me back whatsoever. If he had the ability, if he had anything that I could claim that I would prefer to the animal, then I could take him to court and try and claim that item. But we're dealing with a situation where I bought the animal, Stan was in a going out of business sale. And he sold me the animal in a going out of business sale. And now, even though, usually a going out of business sale says no returns, but it was a mekach tos. So even though he may have said no returns, maybe I have the right to return. So bottom line is now I came back to him and he has zero. He has nothing with which to pay me back. That's the situation that we're talking about. And the answer is that we can't be talking in that situation. We must be talking about.
I understand that, but I was just asking that, he doesn't have money, but he maybe has something else of value. That's all.
Exactly. So, okay. So now Simon, Isha, Ve'evid, Shor, V'Shvarin, Upeiros, those are the 5 different topics that we'll have that are the questions that we will be asking. We're only going to deal with the first question today, and we'll deal with the other questions God willing, tomorrow. So again, now we're going to have five different questions. So question number 1. So Meisvei, Ha'isha shenis almana onis garsha, if a woman got divorced or widowed, Vihi omeres, and she says, Besula nesesi, I was married as as a Besula, as a virgin, and therefore I am entitled to the minimum ksuba obligation of 200 zuz. V'hu omer, and the husband says, obviously that doesn't work if the husband is dead, but if it's but we'll see that it's clearly phrased as if it's the husband. Lo kiela almananisasich, that you were married as a I married you as a widow. So obviously in the situation where the woman was widowed by the husband, it's not the husband making that statement, it's his heirs making that statement. But in any event, that's the question, right? So there's a debate as to whether the woman is entitled to 100 zuz or 200 zuz in terms of her ktuba payment. So im yesh edim sheyatza behinuma. So if there are witnesses that say that she went out with a veil, and that is the process of going out, that a virgin goes out. So then Virosha Perua, and her hair was untied or uncovered, then Ksubasa Masayim. Well, then she obviously was a virgin at the original marriage, and she gets 200. So why do we do that? Taima de Edim. It's only because there are witnesses. Halek Edim. Lo, if there were no witnesses, we would not, in fact, give her the 200. But one second. According to Rav, who says that we follow the majority, Lema halachaka rov hanashim. Let's say we should follow the majority of women, and the rov nashim besulas nisos, and the majority of women who get married are first-time marriages, and so as a result, we should say that they're first-time marriages, and therefore she should get the 200. And so if there's not evidence one way or the other, we should just assume that she gets the 200. And yet we don't say that. So doesn't this Mishnah, which is from Masechet Ksubos Daf Tesvav Amabet, doesn't this counter and contradict Rav and show that Shmuel is correct? So Ravina comes to the rescue for Rav. Ravina Mishum deika lameimar rov nashim besulos nisos. Yes, it is true to say that the majority of women who get married are married as virgins. Umiut amalnos, and the minority are widows. The kol hanises besula yesh la kol. But one second, when you hear about a wedding that is involves a woman who's getting married for the first time, everybody in the public knows about it. But in this case, the public doesn't know. It's not publicly known whether this woman was a first-time marriage or a second-time marriage. Because this woman's original marriage clearly did not have the necessary publicity associated with it to suggest that it was a first-time marriage, itra la ruba. That takes away the benefit of the rove of saying that majority of women marry as first-time marriages, as virgins. So one second, if you're going to tell me that, Ravina, well then why should witnesses work? If you're going to tell me that all marriages of virgins have the publicity associated with a virgin marriage, so ki'ika edem my hubby, who cares that there are witnesses now? If it's not publicly known that everybody would know that this was a first-time marriage, what does it make a difference how that we have some witnesses that say she left the house with a veil or with her hair uncovered? That doesn't make any difference whatsoever, because at the end of the day, the fact that there was no publicity associated with the wedding shows definitively that she had been married previously, and that it was not a first-time marriage. If we know that there's no public knowledge about this marriage, then it shows that those witnesses clearly must be lying. So let's modify exactly what Ravina was trying to say. And he was not, in fact, saying that every single wedding of somebody who's marrying of a woman who's marrying for the first time, who's a virgin, and that is in fact has a voice, but rather Rov hanisos b'sulos yesh lan kol. Most marriages of women who marry for the first time are going to have the public know. Vizu, and this marriage, Hoel ve'ein la kol, since it did not have a public knowledge about whether or not this was a first marriage or second, we are not going to simply follow the majority and give her 200 zuz. Isra la ruba, the majority has been weakened for her. And so as a result, it's been weakened, but it can be refreshed. And the witnesses coming will refresh that majority and say that, in fact, we can follow the majority with respect to this situation. So that we still have 4 more challenges to Rav or Shmuel, but for them, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
Where do we learn it can be refreshed? Where is that coming from in the Gemara?
I'm sorry, speak up just a little
Yeah,
bit.
so where does the Gemara say that this is refreshed by the witnesses?
That's the implication that the point is that we just have Isra la Ruba. We have they're weakened, and therefore the Mishnah itself says that when witnesses come, we will follow. We will let her collect 200. So it shows that the witnesses are sufficient to bring her back into a situation where we can say that that she's like the majority of women who marry, and she was a virgin. Okay.
But in her case, this case without the witnesses, her case would be her claim would be diminished.
Correct.
Her claim would be diminished without the witnesses.
Correct. That's exactly right. Without it, her claim would be diminished. We just finally the banging just stopped here, so I can hear you much better. So, all right. Well, God willing, we will pick up with Tashma at the end of the 4th line from the bottom of Tzadik Bet and Bet. God willing, tomorrow. Look forward to continuing our learning together. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
I want to see this.
All right, take the time.